How many questions do you have so that I know how much detail I have to provide?
Maybe 6 or 7.
Oh,
So
okay, all right.
If a couple more come up, I'll let you know. But
All right.
They don't need to be
Formal?
very deep. No.
Oh, okay. They don't need to be very detailed. Yeah, yeah.
Very detailed.
Well, it depends on the nature of the question, but go ahead.
Because sometimes I will have to cut them shorter.
Oh, yeah, yeah. You edit them.
Right.
All right.
So first, so I can just get on the tape, can you give me your proper spelling of your name and title?
I am Jid Kamoche, Kamoche, and Jid is my name. Gitao, as I've said in class, is my middle name. I'm associate professor of history, and I have been teaching African history and emphasizing South Africa and Africa since 1945 and Africa since 1800.
Okay, and so you've been teaching that for how long?
Oh, I've been teaching South African history for at least 10 to 15 years. I've been here for a long time. So I have not always offered South African history, but yes, I have offered South African history in the spring semester.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes as an honors course, as I indicated to you before. With Professor David Gross, we offered that twice.
And that was over in the Honors College?
Yeah, yeah. At the time, it was sponsored by the Honors College. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you get American students that you're teaching about South Africa, do you find that they know much about apartheid already, or do you find that they really don't know anything?
Well, it depends. Sometimes I've had the good fortune of having students who have been to South Africa. For example, as I indicated, the student with the highest grade, both on the paper and also on the exam, lived in Cape Town. And sometimes I've had students who have been to South Africa and then have taken the course. And many of them tell me that they actually learn a lot and wish that they had taken the course before going to South Africa. My preference would be exactly what you have done yourself. That is, take this course before you go to South Africa. And this is part of the reason why the International Program Center insisted on students having a course on Africa, and especially South Africa, not necessarily with Professor Kamoche, but with anyone who teaches anything South African, like Professor Barry Harris, before we approve of the students going over to South Africa. They need the background. And Terence Blackburn, who later went to Stanford, actually took this course and then went to South Africa, University of Pretoria, where he spent a year. But I also had the good fortune of teaching Chris de Jong, who himself had been a student, a white South African, who had spent his undergraduate days at the Rhodes University and then transferred to OU. And yes, I have had students from South Africa. And I also remember Masood Kaji, who was an Indian South African. And so the class sometimes has generated interest among some students from Southern Africa who are students at the University of Oklahoma. But responding to your question on American students, a lot of them have not had a single course on Africa, much less South Africa, and so we do not have a prerequisite for this course, even though we should, because it is important for somebody to know the map of Africa before concentrating on South Africa. But I'm quite comfortable with people coming to class without any prerequisites. So I changed the format. Before I used to require history 2713, which is African Saved, but then that became a problem because I had to keep waiving the requirement, and I told the department, why don't we actually require the course or teach the course as if nobody had taken an African course before this one. Yeah. So it doesn't have a prerequisite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if you say this movie was being shown to hundreds of college freshmen, pretend that hundreds of college freshmen were seeing this, and they had never heard of apartheid before. They didn't even know what it was. They didn't know about the system or Nelson Mandela. If you just had a minute or two and you wanted to explain to them what it was, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say, first of all, apartheid means apartness or separateness, literally, as I've said in class before. And it was a system of legalized discrimination and segregation, and that this system was unprecedented. Officially, it lasted from 1948 to 1994, but it is only when you define it with a capital A, apartheid. If you have an uncapitalized C, then its roots stretch back to 1652. And that means it was mainly de facto, segregation de facto, or as in fact, before 1948. And then after 1948, even though there were some laws that we call de jure, or de jure, that after 1948, it was a system underpinned by a plethora of laws. And that system supported the concept of social engineering. And it was inhumane and in many ways very destructive of South Africa. It became what Nelson Mandela has called human catastrophe, resulting in the death of many people, not only African or black, but coloreds, Indians, and also white supporters of the struggle against apartheid. So it has been compared with Nazi Germany, but I think the scale of death never amounted to the Holocaust of Germany. But in terms of social degradation and rejection of humanity, it has parallels. I think it was a much more virulent system than the American Jim Crow system in the South. But there are similarities in as much as petty apartheid contained physical segregation of schools and transportation, among other things. And so it was a system of social engineering which amounted to promoting white supremacy, and then below white supremacy were these gradations of colored who are stratified second to white South Africans, and third Indian, and then black number 4. But one should be careful to not translate that ratio hierarchy to mean economic hierarchy, because Indians were better off actually than the coloreds, who normally never had the kind of education and the kind of entrepreneurship that the Indians brought. So per capita incomes were higher among Indians, even though they were classified third. But also what I have called in class life chances followed that hierarchy. For example, in education, a white child would receive 10 rand for every 1 rand that was given to an African, and a colored 7 and an Indian 5. And basically, I think the African people who are the indigenous Africans suffered immensely or enormously until the system ended in 1994. So it was, to conclude, a system of racial hierarchy, racial domination, we call BASCAP, but it was also, in economic terms, a system of racial capitalism that exploited the labor or labor power of African people to the detriment of their welfare system. And so it was a very egregiously evil system whose end came in 1994, but never produced the kind of annihilation or violence that would have killed as many people as Algeria, which suffered a human catastrophe of over 1 million people, suffered. I think apartheid, as I will say in class next week, aborted in 1994 without having inflicted upon itself a racial war of the magnitude of Algeria. So that miracle of 1994 is really credited not only to Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk, but also to the children who perished in 1976 in the Soweto Rebellion, Steve Biko, among others. But also whites like Beas Nodia and Alan Payton, Um, so all those opponents of apartheid, including the Black Sash, contributed significantly to the ending of that system. And so one has to understand that apartheid rested on the principle of human exploitation and degradation.
And can you give, say, like a 1-minute history? You can use the map, you can play it, and kind of show if you were teaching where, where they came around the Cape of Good Hope and why Jan van Riebeeck went, kind of how white people ended up in South Africa. And I know the history, but just...
Oh, yeah. Well, as we have said, the Dutch East India Company came to Table Bay, which is here. And Table Bay, it's it's a bay here, and then it's overlooked by the Table Mountain. And then there was a Cape Village, which is a peninsula here. And Jan van Riebeeck was trying to create a hedge or even a tunnel so that the white South Africans would be separated from the native population. And so they started from here. Roodepoort is where the University of Cape Town is located. That's where I stayed when I was there, 2 weeks over there, and then I moved on. I had been to Witwatersrand. And so some of them began to move to Stellenbosch. And if you remember the 4 districts we talked about, the Cape District started here, then Stellenbosch, then Graaff-Reinet, Swellendam. So it was the Western Cape. The Western Cape is where eventually the Dutch East India Company created administrative districts led by Land Drost. And then we indicated the governor, the first governor, Jan van Riebeeck, from 1652 to 1662, was in charge of the whole colony called Dutch Cape Colony. But keep in mind, as I have said before in class, that there were 4 districts, and each district was led by somebody called Land Drost, and below whom was Ahim Raden, political judicial officer who was paid by the company. And then below that was a Felt Cornet who was not paid any money by anybody. And only the Land Drost actually was paid. Himraden was not paid, and the Felt Cornet was not paid. And some of these people paid themselves with land. So they acquired a lot of land. And I think, to cut the long story short, by the time the British came, as they were waging the Napoleonic Wars in 1795, South Africa was really a frontier society with the truck boers and boers who were called free burghers, and truck boers were venturing into the hinterland. But it was a country governed very tenuously by the company. And that, of course, meant that when the British came, they found themselves with a very confused situation, a linguistic babel, as we have called it, where everybody is speaking a different language, whether it is isiXhosa, isiZulu, or in the case of the Khoisan, they are speaking their own click-ridden languages. And to simplify all that, because the slaves were already there, they introduced a language which simplified Dutch. They would now enrich with local languages called Afrikaans. And then after that, of course, the British would attempt to pacify the region, because they found themselves at war. They found themselves in a situation that I have called imbroglio, and that imbroglio, or confused situation, was one in which the Afrikaners, the truck boers, are moving eastward, and Xhosa speaking peoples are moving west. And so as we have gone on with our history, the first thing was to create a buffer zone, and that buffer zone would create an enclave of peace. And later the British in 1820 introduced their own settlers, and in 1860 Indians came. So what you have is a South African situation with 4 races and a system of apartheid, a small a, was developed over time. But the British really found the system in place. What they did was to adjust to the existing system and rationalize it in such a way that even though they didn't create laws to support it, they perpetuated segregation de facto. Afrikaners are not the ones actually that ruled South Africa from 1795 to 1910. It was the British. And don't let any English South African tell you that we didn't have any problem ourselves. It was the Afrikaners. And this is one position with which I sympathize myself with the Afrikaners, or over which I sympathize with them, that they are not the ones that created the system. It was the British adjusting to what was a very fledgling segregationist system, to which the British adjusted. And even when mining was discovered, as you know, with diamonds, it was people like Cecil John Rhodes who in De Beer Consolidated Mine started the mining compounds. And what we call industrial segregation was really British creation, not the Afrikaner creation. But what happened after 1910, when the Union of South Africa was created, and that's what you really are studying this phase of the course, is that from 1910 to 1994, Afrikaners dominated South Africa. But not until 1948 did they have a government dominated by Afrikaners. What we have in the period we have called de facto segregation, or segregation de facto, is English-speaking South Africans were about 40%, 45%. The Afrikaners, 55%. But the government of South Africa was not exclusively Afrikaans until 1948. Right. And that means that the responsibility for apartheid doesn't rest squarely or exclusively with the Afrikaners. I think that they entrenched a system, they Afrikanerized a system that they inherited from the British. The British inherited segregation from them, but then they gained power in 1910 and started a very active process of segregation de facto, which would later become segregation de jure, or apartheid. And that was not dismantled until 1994. After 1994, if I may offer an epilogue to this long study or discussion or discourse, after 1994, there were so many residual problems or legacy that South Africa is still recovering from that onslaught of the forces of apartheid. And it would be a fallacy if you went to South Africa expecting that the country is safe and it is post-apartheid and that there are no residual problems. I think what you will find is Alexandra is still there. Mamelodi Township is still there. Guguletu in Cape Town is still there. Crossroads you will still find. So how different is it? Well, it is very different in the sense that we don't have the pass system anymore. There is no influx control. And that means more densely populated South African cities. What I found disgusting, in my opinion, especially in Durban, is that because of that situation, housing was not keeping up with the influx of blacks. And so what did they do? They created their own shanty towns. So you will find some of those. The government has been trying to replace those with housing. And what I found is that sewage system was very poor. And the conditions of poverty still remain unfortunately. And both Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki, in their policies of GEAR and the Reconstruction and Development Program, all those programs have done a lot to alleviate the condition. And one thing you'll find, for example, is running water. You know, they have electricity, but not everybody has electricity. Not everybody has running water. So, in short, pay attention to the legacy of apartheid, because you cannot go to South Africa and not find it, poverty. And indeed, if you are reading Mark Shaw's book, that is part of the reason why there is such a high crime, because there are very many poor people who survive on other people's labors. And Thompson says sometimes people go on vacation, they come back to find their houses are taken over by the homeless. But I think on balance, and I refer you to the last sentence or the last page of his Leonard Thompson's book, on balance, the situation in South Africa is immeasurably better than it used to be during apartheid. And I think I asked Terence Blackburn to talk to us after he came back from Pretoria, and he concluded the same by saying the same thing. And people tend to overlook the level of improvement. Yes, South Africa is a better country than it used to be during apartheid. But to overlook the economic problems, the social problems, the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and the onslaught on society, I think would be minimizing the situation we have in South Africa. But South Africa is still the best country south of the Sahara in terms of living conditions, as I think Thompson keeps saying. When you compare South Africa with Nigeria, South Africa is above every country, and you don't want to compare South Africa with Zimbabwe. But South Africa is the best country, not per capita, because Libya is the best. You know, it has over 7,000, maybe 7,000 per capita, whereas South Africa is in the range of maybe 3,000, 4,000, 5,000. But on balance, healthcare, I think you would say democracy and the rest. It is still the country to emulate, even though it has numerous problems. Democracy is working very, very well in South Africa. We've had how many elections? 1999, peaceful elections. 2004, Thabo Mbeki inheriting power from Mandela. And now, next year, they have an election. I expect that Thabo Mbeki will step down with no problem, because constitutionally he cannot run again. And that to me is really what I would like as a person and as a professor here to see in Africa. Because I think that Africa's problems, as one World Bank official said, is a victim of poor governance rather than lack of resources. And if South Africa is the epitome of good governance, I think it is the pace setter, in my opinion, of what the rest of Africa should do. And that's why Kenya, for example, was able to solve its problem. One of the person they had invited to come and help them with reconciliation was a guy you ran into in the reading called Cyril Ramaphosa. And Cyril Ramaphosa, even though the government of Mwai Kibaki rejected him as a reconciliator or reconciler, it was because he was supporting the opposition, and he felt that he would not be impartial. And that means that everyone is turning to South Africa. And before class today, by the way, I heard Mr. Brown, Prime Minister of Britain, and George W. Bush, and they were talking about the Zimbabwe problem, both of them. And it is not far-fetched for me to speculate, because this is not anything that I have to document, that those two heads of state, the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Britain, who said they would like to see the election results released. Otherwise, in the words of President Bush, there is no need to have an election if you're not going to release the results. But in my opinion, and this is pure speculation, I think both Britain and the United States will exert unusual pressure for Mugabe to step down. Whether he will is another story. And on that, I think I'll close my long discussion. And that's a very good question. Why do I like teaching South African history? I'm not even from South Africa. I think it is almost like a Jewish person who teaches the Holocaust. He is entangled with a human tragedy about which many people know very little, and I can contribute to their understanding of human history in an important country and region, far more importantly than I can shed light on Kenya, which I know more about. I've written a book and I'm writing another. But I frankly think for somebody to graduate from college, or graduate school for that matter, and not know anything about South Africa, it's almost like somebody graduating from college and has never heard of Holocaust. You've never heard of apartheid, and you have a university degree, and you don't know what apartheid is. In my opinion, this might be a bias on my opinion. I'm not going to go as far as saying it might be criminal not to know, but I'm going to say it is a serious omission in the catalog of facts that we know and histories that we know. I didn't know there was a Nazi Germany led by Adolf Hitler, and I didn't know about apartheid, and I didn't know about slavery. I would wonder what college I attended. And the fact that Amherst College, from which I graduated, never taught me anything about apartheid is not a very good commentary on what the college was covering at the time. But I can reasonably excuse the college because we had a chance to take South African history at the University of Massachusetts. And also, Mount Holyoke College, not Mount Holyoke, but Smith College had an Africanist who was teaching. So it was laziness on my part that I never really took those courses at the time. But I would say, yes, it's very, very important. It's just like somebody who teaches classics and says you must read Plato's Republic, that you cannot, or Aristotle's Politics and Poetics. Can be a classicist if you don't know anything about Aristotle and Plato and the rest of them. Equally so, I have a bias that you cannot be an Africanist or an internationalist without knowing the plight of the Jews and the Africans in South Africa. So that's the reason I keep offering.
And what do you enjoy the most about teaching?
I think what I enjoy most about teaching is the kind of response I generate. Even though many students I have had, sometimes even sitting next to them in the union, they don't know I'm in the booth, and somebody saying, I had overheard students say, Dr. Kamoche's classes are difficult. You really learn a lot, but he's a very hard grader. And I didn't want to embarrass them by saying, Dr. Kamoche is sitting next to you. But yes, I have the reputation of hard grading. I don't really subscribe, as my chairman of the history department fully knows, to what people are calling grade inflation. I really want to, when somebody gets an A in my class, to be the kind of student who can come back and say, can I get a letter of recommendation, and I'm willing to support that student if he or she is applying to a selective institution like Yale or Stanford or Harvard. And many of the students I recommend, oftentimes get into these institutions because their grade in my class is only one of the A's they have gotten. I mean, they have a good transcript. But I still remember, in the case of Elizabeth, hearing from Yale, and I was surprised, where the case was very close to actually acceptance or rejection, and they called me. I found a message. Yale University Medical School would like you to respond to them. I was running late in getting the letter. And I said, well, it's on the way. And then they asked personal questions about the student. So sometimes they will interview a faculty member because, when you take a place like Yale or Harvard or Columbia, they have a lot of applicants who are excellent students. So it may come down to, we want to know this detailed letter that Professor Kamoche wrote, whether there is something else to add to the quality of the student. And obviously, I don't want to write a letter and say, this student got an A, but in this class of 40 students, there were 20 A's. And I'm not going to embarrass anybody in the history department and say, yeah, I know of my colleagues, some of them give a lot of A's, but I don't. And it's not history, actually, it's the whole university. I think you know this very well. There are some classes here which generate about, out of a class of 40, 15 A's. There might even be 20 A's. In African American studies, some courses I've had generate those kinds of A's. And it really is unfair to the quality student to be bunched up with people who are not doing A work. I think those people belong in the B category, the C category, and some of them D's and F's. And so, yes, I am known to be a hard grader, but I enjoy teaching, but I also regret that I'm not one of those professors who have had the good fortune to combine research, scholarship, and teaching. I spend an enormous amount of time preparing my lectures, reading exams and papers, and we only have 24 hours to work with. But I know some of my colleagues, one of them actually writes a lot, and I'm not going to begin to say what they do or don't do. But I would like to have time to do some writing because I think I have some things to say, but I just don't think I have enough time to do writing and teaching. This book I've been working on for some time should have been completed if I were not teaching. But I teach a lot of courses, 2 in the regular semester, intersession because of South Africa, summer session, and then I have 7 weeks, then I travel to the continent. Then I have to come back and still continue to work on the manuscript. And that is again to suggest that, yeah, I could go on another 10 years of teaching, but I don't want to do it. I want to do more 2 years, then I'm done. And if I decide to, I can tell you I'm not going to write an autobiography, but if I get bored with writing history, don't be surprised if I write a novel. Because I always like to use a lot of works of fiction, as you know, in my classes. And it would be good to fictionalize some of these things I talk about as historical things. But again, and I'm right now waiting for a novel my nephew wrote, the former Rhodes Scholar, short stories. He's much more prolific in writing than I am. But that's not a priority for me. Fiction, works of fiction. I'm committed to history. But if I decide I wanted to write something, one thing I would never do, and you can rest assured, the only way I could write an autobiography if I became a president of Kenya, and then I have to tell the story. But other than that, I don't think it's really worth talking about.
And you don't plan on running for president of Kenya?
Oh, no. Politics, I have learned it the hard way. I especially after watching the debate last night. Did you watch it?
I did not see it.
Oh.
Was it just Obama and Clinton?
Obama and Clinton. This was the worst debate I've ever. Actually, why don't you try to go to the CNN or maybe even to see a replay? It was Gibson, the anchorman for ABC, and Stephanopoulos.
Right.
Stephanopoulos. He has a difficult Greek name, and this guy used to be a Clinton supporter.
Right. He worked
and it looked like he was a surrogate for Hillary. They really, really gave Obama a very difficult time. So if you don't hear anything else, you hear Obama complaining today in North Carolina, in today's news, that these two people, they didn't even have the courtesy to invite a lady, to interview these people. They were two guys, Gibson and Stephanopoulos, and they spent 45 minutes just rehashing the Jeremiah Wright issue and these latest comments on bitterness. And that's really a sheer waste of American people's time when there are real issues like education, like home closings, foreclosures, and the very severe problems that this country faces. So I was really very angry to devote 90 minutes of watching this thing. And they were just giving Obama a very hard time. So he was on the defensive, and I was surprised today to hear that he won the debate, according to the pollsters. And I hear that the latest I heard too was that the pollsters are indicating that the poll in Pennsylvania is now almost even. I was shocked to hear that. I was shocked to hear that because I had predicted that Obama would win Pennsylvania, and this person said, I think that's wishful thinking. He's not going to win Pennsylvania. It might still be wishful thinking on my part, but I had said he would win 51-49 because Hillary is very vulnerable. I started off actually supporting her, but she has shown with Bill Clinton, in my opinion, and you don't have to agree with me, that I think there's a problem. There's a problem on that side, and that's why, personally, I'm supporting Obama.
What do you think people in Kenya will think if he gets elected, knowing that he has Kenyan roots?
I think Kenyans are very supportive, but what I'm impressed with this young man, and I actually stayed very late reading his Audacity of Hope. I still have 100 pages to go. It's 347. Is that Kenyans see the connection between Mr. Obama, his dad, and this connection. So they are excited, not just in Kenya, but the whole of Africa. In fact, I think when President Bush was in Tanzania, he was asked the same question. Africans are very supportive of Obama, but it is not just Africans. In Britain, in Europe, I even heard Italians are saying Obama, Obama, Obama. He's a new phenomenon, and if I may actually hazard the guess, he reminds a lot of us, myself included, of John F. Kennedy. And I wasn't here when John F. Kennedy was elected, but he was an electrifying character that inspired young people to go into Peace Corps, and he talked about the new frontier of knowledge and space and all that. And I think Obama, in my opinion, is a new phenomenon in American politics. Well, it is a long story, and I usually am humble enough not to write an autobiography because I've always said
I think you should.
yeah, first of all, I have felt that unless you're Mark Matabane or Nelson Mandela, and you really are telling the story of how an evil system never quite crushed you, you were resilient enough. So I think when I see these people writing autobiographies, it is not to parade their successes. I don't have a story to tell, except to say that I was very fortunate because after my dad died, I could very well have gone any direction that Barack Obama has been talking about. But I was one of those fortunate students who had bursaries, what the British call the bursaries, and had an education. I took my Cambridge exam and passed the exam. And then we were selected, those who had passed in the first grade or division and second, and were given full scholarships instead of going on to try and get to the university back home. So I took that opportunity because I never had left Kenya and came to the United States to study. And one thing led on to another. I'm not surprised when undergraduate students like you tell me, I don't know what I will do after this degree. because that was my position. I never really knew what I was going to get into. At one point I thought maybe law. I was interviewed for a place at the University of Pennsylvania to study business, and probably if I had pursued it, I would have gone to the Wharton School because I was majoring in economics and history. But then I decided not law and not business. So here I had a history major. So I decided to go to graduate school. Even though I got into several graduate schools, the one that gave me money, and I have mentioned Columbia University didn't give me money, the University of Massachusetts gave me an assistantship, so I took it. I could not have paid money, so I took my master's, then I was in Syracuse, and the State University of New York, where I received my doctorate from. And I would say, for me, I didn't really program my life beyond the bachelor's degree. I was supposed to go home after the first degree, but I decided to move on, subject to receiving a scholarship. And then after I actually pursued history, I decided, well, what do you do with a PhD other than teach it in history? And so I applied for jobs, and as I was saying in class, I did consider two institutions. One is the University of Oklahoma, and the other one was Washington State University at Pullman. And I flew to Spokane, and then this other place called Pullman. I didn't really like the way I traveled there. So I settled on Oklahoma, and been here for some time. And yeah, that has been my autobiographical account. And one thing on a personal note that I can tell you is that I don't know how much longer I'm going to be here because my wife has moved to Chicago. I think I have said to my chairman that I might leave OU, and I don't announce this in classes because it really doesn't make very much difference. But I've been concerned that when I leave, we must continue to teach African history. But June 30th is really my deadline. I don't think I want to go beyond that, particularly because my wife recently got a very good job in Chicago. And it's very difficult to have a commuter marriage. And so if I leave, I don't know what my agenda will be. I'm a tenured faculty member. I might come maybe once in a while to teach South African history class, maybe over the summer or maybe intersession. But I do want to write, and I think that writing is very difficult when you are teaching. And I would like to read and write and have time also to travel, maybe even spend a semester in a South African university or Kenyan university. But I don't want to be one of those professors, and I can tell you this as not only a student but as a friend, that I don't want to spend all my life in the classroom. I think it is good to sit back and reflect upon life. Money has never really been a big thing for me. I have enough to live on. And I would like to write when I am not rushing to class. And as you heard me say today, I really encourage students to rely on self-study. That's why I don't feel guilty. Sometimes I feel guilty, running 5 minutes late because I'm keeping people waiting, not purposely. But in another sense, I don't feel all that guilty because I think 5 minutes of study of the literature that we are talking about will help people. So yes, I have taught for a long time. I really don't want to go beyond June 30th, 2010, unless it is an ad hoc course. And South Africa is very, very much close to me, and don't be surprised if you hear I have moved to South Africa for a semester or for a year. And I really wish you very well on your trip to South Africa. I hope you are able to appreciate the beauty of the country, but also to live the history you've been reading about, because I think it's a very good idea what you did to take a couple of African history classes before going there.